Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. Listen to what Maimonides wrote about 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago. Words truly as relevant now as they were then. He wrote, even though the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a biblical decree, meaning it's simply something that must be performed, it hints at something on an inner dimension. That is to say, wake up, sleepers, from your sleep, and slumberers, arise from your slumber. Search your ways and return in tshuva, and remember your Creator. Those who forget the truth amidst the vanity of the moment and are infatuated all their years with vapidity and nothingness that will not help and will not save, examine your souls, improve your ways and your motivations. Let each of you abandon their wicked ways and their thoughts, which are no good. The shofar calls to us with an uncanny power, primal and wordless, issuing from the body of an animal connected to human lips and breath. The strange sounds are meant to wake us up in the most profound of ways. Today, although it is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, when we usually sound the shofar, we will hear no blasts today, as Shabbat prevents its sounding. So our prayers, our reflections, our words, and our imaginations will have to do. With each of its various blasts, the shofar calls us, in fact, begs us to wake up. No doubt we all need to wake up individually. Each of us has different ways in which we might hear the call to wake up this year. There are relationships we need to attend to. There are words we said or failed to say in this past year, actions we made or failed to make, which we must account for. For some of us, waking up means recognizing that we have been relating to ourselves improperly, perhaps too harshly and critically, or perhaps somewhat deceptively for the sake of self-gain. Or maybe our waking up has to do with our relationship with God, the Holy One of Being, the source of our life and grantor of our days. It is in relation to these three categories of life that the rabbis implore us to take stock at this hour: our relationship with ourselves, with others, and with God. Hopefully your Elul practice this past month has gotten you started in this cheshbon hanefesh, this soul accounting. But even if not, it's okay. Today, as Rabbi Jacob reminded us last night, is the first of the 10 days of repentance. It's a whole period meant to enable us to do the work. So let's begin. In addition to all the waking up we need to do individually, we also need to wake up collectively. There's a famous story about Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement. When his daughter was a little girl, she asked him, "Abba, Daddy, when we're asleep, I know we can wake up, but when we're awake, can we wake up more?" I think we can. If we've been asleep in any way to what is happening around the globe and right here at home due to climate change, this summer has woken us up more deeply. The tragedy about climate change we now know is that we needed to have acted quite differently long ago to avert cataclysmic change. But denial is so strong, and thoughts about the consequences of what our data prophets predicted so overwhelming that many of us did not believe the science we could only comprehend with our heads until the reality was much more extreme and we could feel it with our bodies. This summer, the reality reached our own door right here in our Happy Valley. Whether it was the several days we literally had the worst air quality on the planet due to smoke from the fires raging in Canada, or the devastation of our own CSA farms from sudden flooding, farms of which we here are members and depend upon for our nourishment, or record heat that kept us submerged in water or entirely indoors day and night. We are awake now, but can we wake up more? Let's face it, the old world, the fossil fuel dependent world, the world built on the dream of unlimited progress, this world is dying, and a new world is trying to be born. This is what is happening right now. When we wake up more, we see this, we let the truth in, we understand our condition, but then we blink, we get distracted, we see and we look away. It's always easier to deny reality, writes journalist and social critic Naomi Klein, than to allow our worldview to be shattered. What I want to say this morning is that it isn't just the outer world that is shattering, it's our inner world too. Our weird Weltanschauung, weird standing for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Yes, our weird, Enlightenment-inspired view of the world. That's not my term, okay? I like it though. Our weird, Enlightenment-inspired view of the world is shattering too. We aren't, as it turns out, entirely rational, objective subjects who can stand outside, described, and act upon a world of objects. Instead, we humans are growing to understand that we live within a world of interpenetrating, interdependent subjectivities. We are part of ecosystems, human and more than human, bubbling with life in its myriad forms. And it turns out that our well-being and others' well-being is entirely interconnected. Even fairly straight systems of healthcare are awakening to this truth. The One Health movement, for instance, is a collaborative approach to health which recognizes that humans and animals, other animals, live in a shared environment. And it's necessary to work on issues at the interface of our different sectors, our different habitats. We have to start thinking differently about who we are in relation to the rest of creation. In order to move forward into this time of planetary convulsion brought about by climate change, I believe we need to allow our default Enlightenment-inspired worldview to be shattered, to let the walls come tumbling down. My dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Alan Liu, Alav HaShalom, wrote compellingly about the necessity of such shattering in his brilliant book about the sweep of this time in our Jewish calendar. His book called, "This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared." Alan starts by exploring Tisha B'Av, the time when the walls literally came tumbling down, when the great edifices and institutions of the first and second temples in Jerusalem were destroyed. And he ends his review of this time in our calendar by exploring Sukkot, those days when we sit in our flimsy structures with only 2.5 sagging walls wrapped around us, barely a roof over our heads, open to the elements and entirely stripped down, vulnerable and joyous. A time after all the work of these holy days are done, our defenses shattered, our denials and delusions peeled away, purified of views and actions that no longer serve. We sit together in the sukkah, trued, authentic, guileless, endowed with a new bearing with which to meet the world. There are times, indeed, when our defenses, our security, our reliances on the old ways need to shatter in order to build something new, something that will serve. Such shattering and rebuilding is the symbolic meaning of the shofar, according to our 17th century teacher, Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz. He says, we start this process of tshuva with some sense of wholeness, represented by the long, unbroken call, Tekiah. And then as we begin the process of introspection and soul searching, we admit just a crack of vulnerability, just enough to weaken our defensive. Shavarim, ooh, ooh, ooh. How am I doing on the shofar college? And then if we're on a path of deep tshuva, if we're so willing and so graced, there might come a time of actual shattering, a holy fracturing of the constructs of ourselves and of the world that no longer serve. Teruah, blown to pieces. And with God's help, we emerge on the other side with a new, rebuilt wholeness. You know what it sounds like. Tekiah Gedolah. So I ask today, might we allow a collective shattering, a shattering for the sake of heaven, a holy shattering? I mean the shattering of a worldview that impedes our capacity to meet this moment in planetary life. The worldview that many of us hold of our place, the place of human beings in the order of creation. If we're to align and engage with this moment of outer turbulence in which we so clearly find ourselves, this time of planetary convulsion and collapse, we need to reimagine, in Mary Oliver's words, our place in the family of things. Well, what is the traditional Jewish view of our place in the family of things? We read in the first chapter of Genesis, and I'm going to select among the verses to make my point. God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created humankind in the divine image. God blessed them and said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that's upon the earth, and every tree that is seed-bearing fruit. It shall be yours for food. And God saw all that had been made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. It's an exquisite story. Many of us have read and loved this story since we were little. And it echoes some part of what evolutionary science tells us too. We humans are indeed latecomers to the planet, created quite recently, as if on the sixth day, when compared to seed-bearing plants evolving over 300 million years ago, and birds 100 million years ago, and fish and creeping things and all the rest. And cultural history tells us that, yes, through hunting and farming and various forms of domestication, we do indeed use all manner of life to our benefit. But the story reads as if it were all created for our benefit, doesn't it? As if we're at the apex and the center of creation, as if we are what it's all about. But is this a story for our time? Is this a story that will serve? Rabbi B'nai Lapé, the founder of Svara, the queer yeshiva, who lectured here at CBI some time ago, teaches that a successful master story can last a really long time. But she says, quote, every story will ultimately and inevitably crash. You'll find a more compelling story whose answers you like better. Or an event will occur that will make your story's answer no longer workable. Or something inside you will shift, you will have changed, and those old answers just don't seem true anymore. End quote. And so she says there are three, and she says only three responses to any crash. One, you can deny the crash, return to your master story, and take refuge there. And build a wall around that story, make sure that no threatening information gets in, which is a kind of fundamentalism. Or two, you can accept the crash and completely reject the master story and jump off into a new story. Say, just ground in the scientific story of evolution. Leave Jewish formulations of myth and discourse entirely. Or she says three, you can accept the crash, embrace it, go back to the tradition, take with you what still works, mix the old with the new, hear echoes of our theme, mix the old with the new, and create a radically new tradition, a new Judaism. My friends, we are in the midst of a crash about our place in creation. As Jews who understand, as Mordecai Kaplan said, that we are an active part in evolving religious civilization, we need to choose option 3. We need to find a renewed and authentic way to tell a Jewish spiritual story about our place in creation. Scholar Art Green, who's also been a visiting scholar here at CBI, wrote, quote, "We humans stand in a moment when we must find teachings that will change our way of life if we and our world are to go on living," end quote. For instance, Art says, quote, "Of the options provided within the Bible for defining humanity's role, I much prefer Psalm 148's vision of us as part of the universal chorus of praise over Genesis 1's isolating us as the final creation on the eve of the Sabbath with its accompanying message of stewardship. A true understanding of the unitive vision that is proclaimed in our mystic sources would lead us beyond the demands of stewardship, the usual ethic derived from the biblical tale. Life's meaning is to be found in discovering the one, capital O, that leads us to realize the ultimate unity of all being. It is in yichud, he writes, connection, discovering and proclaiming the underlying oneness of all existence, that our humanity is fulfilled," end quote. Art is pointing to another creation story in our tradition, the one championed by our Kabbalistic forebearers. This creation story says, in the beginning, there was ayin, nothingness, a great fecund nothingness, no thingness, out of which, for reasons we cannot possibly fathom, manifestation began to occur. A great concatenation of form from the most refined to the most coarse emanated out of this source, an expression, a pressing out, a spreading out of divine being. And just as the sun is never separate from his rays, or a flame from a burning coal, or a turtle from its shell in the classic metaphors of our mystics, all of being remains connected to its source, never separate. All of existence is understood to be but a manifestation of that source, so that all of creation, by definition, brims with divine presence. It's just that we are usually asleep to it. Based on this idea, the early Hasidic teachers, mystical popularizers that they were, proclaimed over and over as a guiding mantra, something we proclaim today in our liturgy, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 the whole earth is filled with God's presence. Right here, never separate. In every single person, animal, plant, and rock. Can you see it? Can you feel it? It's all right here. It's all right here. We're just usually asleep to it. Chaim Miller, a contemporary Hasidic scholar, wrote, quote, "Creation is the process by which God becomes the universe." All that we can see and touch and understand about creation, and all that we can't see and understand and get about creation, this is how God becomes the world. Therefore, if we follow Jewish mystical theology, if we comprehend that all form in every micro and macro ecosystem on the planet is equally filled with God's presence, then we are compelled to recalibrate our understanding of our place in the family of things. Systems thinking, ecological thinking, stressing the interrelationship and interdependence of species gives us a different picture of our place in the family of things. Many of you are familiar with the classic example of what happened when wolves were removed from Yellowstone. some years ago. The wolves were eliminated from the national park and also the surrounding national forests because it was feared that if any wolves remained there, they'd eventually spread back into private lands, which had been deemed a problem. In the 70 years of the wolves' absence, the entire Yellowstone ecosystem fell out of balance. Without the wolves, coyotes ran rampant, the elk population exploded, overgrazing willows and aspens. Without those trees, songbirds began to decline, beavers could no longer build their dams, and riverbanks started to erode. Turns out we're part of a vast wholeness. Every species finds its place within the whole, and we now know without a shadow of a doubt that our species has overstepped its place in the planet's ecosystem, and we desperately, desperately, desperately need to right it. Maya Lin, the artist who's ecologically inspired What Is Missing exhibit, was recently shown here at the Smith Art Museum, wrote, quote, 1 in 5 mammals, 1 in 3 amphibians, 1 in 8 birds, and 1 in 3 freshwater fish so far assessed are known to be threatened with extinction, with human alteration of their habitat being the single biggest cause. We know what needs doing. We know to reduce carbon emissions, protect habitat, conserve, reforest, reform land use, develop and make accessible renewable energy. We know. But why a new story? Why all this emphasis on stories today? Because Rosh Hashanah is a day we refer to as the birthday of the world, a day we contemplate cosmic beginnings, a most propitious time to contemplate our origin stories and their implications, and also because stories are powerful. Stories make us and make the world. Poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote, "The universe is made of stories, not of atoms." Furthermore, we can't do without stories. Nature abhors a vacuum of stories. Something will come in to tell us what the world is like and what our place is in it. So we would do well to choose our stories. We would do well to choose our stories. As Jews, people ever renewing ourselves as part of this evolving religious civilization, we need a sacred story, a religious mythology to tell us our place in the family of things, to direct our most comprehensive seeing, to ignite our most holy feeling, as well as to inspire our most righteous acting. Without a sacred story born of our religious imaginations, rooted deep in our minds and hearts, our actions will be like mere hands disconnected from the rest of our bodies, partial, detached, and weak. Without a robust Jewish sacred story to ground us and re-inspire us, we will tire of action alone. We will burn out, and we will despair. Art Green again writes, "A seismic shift in the mythical underpinnings of our consciousness is required. Nothing else will do the trick." He writes, "In the emergence of a new tale of origins, we Jews who have for so long been bearers of the old tale have a special interest. The new tale will need to achieve its own harmony with no less genius than was possessed by the author of Genesis 1. It will need to tell of the unity of all beings and help us to feel that fellow creaturehood with trees and rivers, as well as with animals and humans. As it brings us to awareness of our common source, ever present in each of us, so must it value the distinctiveness and sacred integrity of each creature on its own," end quote. Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 the whole world, the whole earth, all of creation is filled with God's presence. Can we wake up more? The awakening is happening all around us. Perhaps the pandemic, which put an abrupt halt to business as usual, helped us to awaken. Have you noticed the number of books, films, and art installations in the past few years alone crying out to us to recognize and respect the sentience and intelligence of plants and animals, telling us of our interconnection and interdependence, To name just a few of the most popular, the film My Octopus Teacher, highlighting the sentience and intelligence of a species around for hundreds of millions of years, having developed along a different branch from ours in the Tree of Life. Suzanne Simard's research, as articulated in her book, Finding the Mother Tree, on the intelligence and communication, and even what we might call care, distributed among underground hyphal networks and vast forests of trees. Merlin Sheldrake's brilliant book about the extraordinary work of fungi more generally, called Entangled Life. Eco-philosopher Melanie Challenger's book, Being Animal, exploring our resistance to knowing ourselves as animal, and the list goes on and on. Shofar sounds, they're all around us. The call to wake up coming from the earth and its manifold forms, if only we might listen. Perhaps we need to get proximate, as Brian Stevenson has spoken about in another call to cultivate love and justice. Perhaps we need to get close to our plant and animal ancestors living right here in our neighborhood. Perhaps we need to learn about their history and their forms of sentience and cognition to grow in wonder and awe as to how the divine dons this coat of many colors we call earth. If we get proximate to this earth and its endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, as Darwin wrote, if we see and learn and wonder and allow ourselves to feel, if we fall down on our knees in response to the wild, live beauty of it all, if we listen, we might hear the shofar sounding, calling us to wake up. I've been hearing the shofar the last couple days. Not only in my Elu practice, but in the form of other animals, such as the migrating geese. Have you heard them? Their honking, not so different a timbre from the shofar, really, calls out to us on their travels south through the skies, choosing life and change. They might arouse us from, in the Rambam's words, vapidity and nothingness that will not help and not save. They might awaken us to examine our souls, improve our motivations, and abandon thoughts which are no good. They might stir our imagination to new thoughts and a new story with greater possibility for saving. As the great Rabbi Mary Oliver wrote, whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Over and over announcing your place in the family of things.